To understand the world as it exists today, one must first dismantle it. We must strip away the concrete highways that scar the continents, dissolve the steel skeletons of our cities, and silence the constant hum of the electromagnetic spectrum. We must look down, past the thin layer of soil that supports our agriculture, past the gravel of the Pleistocene glaciation, and into the deep, compressed lithosphere. There is a memory trapped in the stone, a narrative written in isotopes and fossilized pollen, waiting to be read by those with the patience to listen to the silence of the bedrock. This is not a story of human history, which is a mere flicker in the grand chronology of the planet. This is the story of the Mesozoic, an era of such profound scale and alien majesty that our minds struggle to comprehend the sheer duration of its dominance. We begin our descent not with a roar, but with a specific silent anomaly found in the rock record across the globe. It is a thin, distinct band of sediment, often dark, bruising the geological column like a scar. Geologists call it the Permian-Triassic boundary. To the touch, this layer feels greasy, composed of fine particulate matter, carbon, and the chemical signatures of a suffocated ocean. It is a physical demarcation line between the ancient world and the middle life. Below this line, the stone is rich with the chaotic diversity of the Paleozoic. Above it, for several meters of vertical strata, there is silence. There is emptiness. This boundary represents the greatest catastrophe life has ever endured. 252 million years ago, the Siberian traps erupted, tearing the crust open and flooding the atmosphere with carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur. The oceans acidified. The circulation of global currents stalled. 96% of all marine species vanished. 70% of terrestrial vertebrates ceased to exist. The Earth was left a scoured, feverish wasteland, a planet of purple oceans and gray skies. It is here, in the ashes of the Great Dying, that our investigation begins. We stand on the precipice of the Triassic, looking out over a silent, healing world, asking the fundamental question: how did the biosphere reconstruct itself from near-total annihilation to produce the titans that would rule for the next 180 million years? The stakes of this inquiry are defined by the fragility of the evidence itself. The Earth is a dynamic, churning engine. The process of plate tectonics, the subduction of oceanic crust, and the uplift of mountain ranges is a mechanism of erasure. The vast majority of the Mesozoic world has been destroyed, melted down in the mantle or ground to dust by wind and water. What we possess is a fractured library, a book with most of its pages torn out. We are attempting to reconstruct a three-dimensional reality, complete with sounds, smells, and behaviors from two-dimensional impressions left in dried mud. Every fossil is a statistical miracle, a defiance of the natural order of decay. Therefore, when we find a discrepancy, a fossil that defies the established timeline, or a geological formation that contradicts the climate models, we must pay attention. These anomalies are the keys to unlocking the true nature of the lost world. Our first investigation centers on a geological paradox found within the earliest layers of the Triassic period, specifically in the strata of the Karoo Basin in South Africa and the Ural Mountains of Russia. The fact is a specific biological entity, preserved in the fossil record with startling abundance. It is a creature known as Lystrosaurus. Physically, it is an unassuming animal, roughly the size of a pig, with a barrel chest, a stubby tail, and a face that could only be described as a biological compromise. It possessed a beak similar to a turtle and two downward-pointing tusks. It was not a dinosaur, but a synapsid, a member of the lineage that would eventually lead to mammals. The sheer volume of Lystrosaurus fossils in the early Triassic strata is overwhelming. In some beds, it accounts for 95% of all terrestrial vertebrates found. The paradox lies in the survival of this specific creature. The The Permian-Triassic extinction event killed everything from the apex predators like the gorgonopsids to the smallest insects. The atmosphere was toxic. Oxygen levels had plummeted to roughly 15%, comparable to the altitude of a high mountain peak today, and the global temperature had spiked by 10 degrees Celsius. Most specialized herbivores starved as the flora collapsed. Most carnivores died as their prey vanished. Yet, Lystrosaurus did not just survive. It thrived in a way that no single genus has before or since. It became the single most dominant vertebrate on land. Mathematically, this distribution makes no sense. In a collapsed ecosystem, diversity usually plummets, and populations remain low and fragmented. For a single species to monopolize the biomass of an entire planet immediately following an apocalypse defies the standard models of ecological recovery. The conventional scientific explanation, the skeptic's view, suggests that Lystrosaurus was simply a disaster taxon, a generalist that got lucky. The argument posits that because it ate a wide variety of plant matter and had no remaining predators, it expanded into the vacuum left by the extinction. Mainstream paleontology often attributes this success to a lack of competition, painting Lystrosaurus as the mediocre winner of a forfeit game. They argue that its dominance was a fluke of passive survival, a waiting game until the archosaurs evolved to displace them. However, the rebuttal to this dismissal lies in the physiological engineering of the animal itself, revealed through advanced osteohistology, the study of bone microstructure. We must look closer at the bones of this survivor. When we analyze the growth rings in Lystrosaurus tusks and the density of their ribs, we find evidence of a creature that was not merely lucky, but radically adapted to a hostile atmosphere. The barrel chest was not just for bulk. It accommodated massive lungs capable of extracting oxygen from the thin, poisoned air. Furthermore, the bone structure suggests that Lystrosaurus was capable of torpor, a state of suspended animation similar to hibernation. But the most compelling evidence comes from the sediment surrounding the bones. We find these fossils inside casting structures that preserve the shape of underground burrows. Lystrosaurus was a digger. When the surface temperatures soared to lethal levels, and the hypercanes, massive storms driven by the heated oceans, scoured the surface, this creature went underground. It engineered its own microclimate. The paradox of its domination is resolved not by luck, but by a specific technological adaptation, the burrow. It survived because it retreated from the surface of the Earth. This offers us a sensory window into the early Triassic. Imagine a world of red dust, silent and baking under a relentless sun, where the only movement comes from the sudden eruption of dust as a Lystrosaurus emerges from the cool dark of the earth to forage on scrub roots before retreating again. It was a troglodytic world, a planet of hidden life waiting for the air to clear. As we move forward in deep time, traversing 10 million years of slow recovery, the lithosphere changes texture. The red, oxidized sandstones of the early Triassic begin to give way to different chemical compositions. The Earth is healing. The oxygen levels are rising. We are approaching the boundary of the Carnian stage, roughly 230 million years ago. Here, we encounter a second major investigation, one that challenges our understanding of how the age of dinosaurs truly began. The site of interest is the Esquigualasto Formation in Argentina, a desolate, moon-like landscape of eroding clay and ash. Embedded within these layers is the fact, the sudden appearance of the first true dinosaurs, such as Eoraptor and Herrerasaurus. These were small, bipedal, agile predators. They were distinct from the sprawling reptile ancestors that came before them. The Eoraptor measured hardly a meter in length, light-boned and grasping. The paradox here is the climate context in which they appeared. For decades, the Triassic was understood as a time of supreme aridity. The supercontinent Pangaea was vast, and its interior was assumed to be a continuous, scorching desert far from the moisture of the oceans. The geological models predicted that such a dry, resource-poor environment would stifle rapid evolution and limit the size and diversity of new life forms. Reptiles, generally, require external heat, but they also require water for the complex metabolism needed to support an active, predatory lifestyle. How, then, did the dinosaur lineage burst onto the scene with such rapidity and diversity in the middle of a planetary desert? The standard view held that dinosaurs evolved slowly, gradually accumulating traits in isolated pockets of the Pangaea Desert, outcompeting other archosaurs over tens of millions of years through superior locomotion. The skeptic argues that the suddenness of their appearance is an artifact of preservation, that we simply haven't found the transitional fossils in the desert sands. They maintain the narrative of the slow rise, a gradual takeover of the ecosystem. This explanation fails to account for a massive geochemical anomaly known as the Carnian pluvial episode. The rebuttal comes from the isotopes of oxygen and carbon found in the teeth of conodonts, eel-like creatures that lived in the oceans of the time, and the sudden deposition of kaolinite clay in the rock record. Kaolinite forms only in humid, tropical weathering conditions. The data reveals that for 2 million years it rained. It did not just rain. The heavens opened up and altered the hydrological cycle of the entire planet. The arid deserts of Pangaea transformed into lush, humid basins. This was likely triggered by the eruption of the Rangelia Large Igneous Province, located in what is now Western Canada, which pumped massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, triggering a sudden global warming spike that increased humidity. The dinosaur explosion correlates exactly with this rainfall. It was not a slow grind in the desert. It was a biological response to a sudden abundance of green energy. The damp, warm world fueled the growth of seed ferns and gymnosperms, which in turn provided the caloric density needed for the dinosaurian metabolism to ignite. The paradox of the desert dinosaur is resolved by acknowledging that the desert temporarily vanished. Visualize this shift. Stand on the cracked, dry earth of Pangaea. The air is dry enough to crack your lips. Then, the clouds gather thick, bruising cumulonimbus towers that stretch into the stratosphere. The first drops hit the dust, kicking up the scent of petrichor, a smell that has not existed in this region for eons. The rain falls for 1,000 years, then 10,000, then 1,000,000. The red dust turns to mud, then to soil. Ferns unfurl in the humidity, and moving through this new, wet undergrowth, the small, bird-like head of Eoraptor twitches, its eyes scanning for insects. The silence of the wasteland is replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of scaled bodies. The dinosaurs did not conquer the desert. They rode the storm. We must now advance the geological clock significantly, crossing the boundary into the Jurassic. The world has broken apart. Pangaea is rifting, tearing along the seams to form the embryonic Atlantic Ocean. The climate has stabilized into a warm, humid greenhouse. There are no polar ice caps. The sea levels are high. We are entering the age of the giants. Our third investigation brings us to the Morrison Formation, a vast stretch of sedimentary rock extending through what is now the American West. It is a graveyard of titans. The sensory experience of this stone is different. It is sandstone and mudstone, painted in bands of pastel gray, green, and maroon, deposited by slow-moving rivers and vast floodplains. The fact at the center of this inquiry is the existence of the sauropods: Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, Brachiosaurus. These animals defy logic. A Brachiosaurus could stand 40 feet tall and weigh as much as 10 elephants. Their necks extended like suspension bridges, holding heads small in proportion to their bodies high into the canopy. The preservation of these skeletons is often complete enough to reconstruct their mass with high accuracy. We know they existed. we can touch their femurs, which are taller than a human being. The paradox is a matter of thermodynamics and biology. How does a terrestrial animal of this size function? The caloric requirements to move 50 tons of biological mass are astronomical. To consume enough vegetation to fuel this body, the animal would essentially need to be eating every second of its waking life. Furthermore, the mechanics of respiration and circulation present a nightmare for a biologist. How does the heart pump blood 40 feet vertically to the brain against the crushing force of gravity? If a brachiosaurus raised its head quickly, it should pass out. If it lowered its head to drink, the blood pressure should cause a stroke. Additionally, large animals retain heat. In the warm Jurassic climate, a creature of this volume should cook from the inside out, generated by its own metabolic heat. The mainstream explanation for decades was that these animals were slow, sluggish, and semi-aquatic. Early paleo art depicted them submerged in swamps, using the water to support their weight, their necks sticking out like snorkels. When that was disproven by biomechanical analysis showing their lungs would collapse under water pressure, the explanation shifted to them being gigantotherms, animals with slow metabolisms that maintain body temperature simply through sheer size, moving slowly to avoid overheating. The skeptic views them as overgrown lizards, evolutionary experiments in excess that were barely functional. The rebuttal, however, lies in the pneumatization of their skeletal structure. When we scan the vertebrae of a sauropod, we do not find dense, solid bone. We find air pockets, honeycombs of hollows. These bones were light, but more importantly, these hollows were not empty. They were filled with air sacs, part of a respiratory system identical to that of modern birds. This changes everything. Sauropods were not breathing like mammals, expanding and contracting a diaphragm. They had a unidirectional flow of air. They were extracting oxygen on both the inhale and the exhale. This is the most efficient respiratory system in nature. This system also acted as an internal cooling mechanism, a biological air conditioning unit running through their core and neck, dissipating the heat that would otherwise kill them. But the true revelation comes from the flora found in the Morrison Formation. We find evidence of vast forests of horsetails and conifers. The nutritional analysis of these ancient plants suggests they were tough and fibrous. The sauropod didn't chew. It stripped branches and swallowed the matter whole, using a massive fermentation vat of a stomach to break it down. They were walking industrial fermenters. Close your eyes and stand on the Jurassic floodplain. The ground trembles, a low-frequency vibration felt in the soles of your feet long before the source is visible. The air is thick with the resinous smell of conifers and the humidity of the nearby river. The sound is not a roar, but a deep, resonant rumbling below the range of human hearing infrasound. It is the sound of a diplodocus herd communicating over miles. They emerge from the tree line, not as sluggish swamp monsters, but as graceful, high-walking architectural marvels. They are bird-like in their respiration, efficient machines of biology, stripping the landscape with a terrifying efficiency. They are not mistakes of evolution. They are its masterpiece of engineering, solving the problems of gravity and thermodynamics with hollow bones and air sacs. As we traverse the millions of years of the Jurassic, the continents continue to drift. The Atlantic widens. The world becomes fragmented. We arrive at the Cretaceous, the final and longest act of the Mesozoic drama. The investigation here shifts from the land to the sea, specifically to the chalk deposits of the Western Interior Seaway. This shallow ocean bisected the North American continent, connecting the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. The water was warm, murky, and teeming with life. The seabed is now the chalk badlands of Kansas. The fact for this cycle is the fossil of a Tylosaurus, a distinct genus of mosasaur. This was a marine reptile growing up to 45 feet in length. It was the apex predator of the Cretaceous seas. The fossil reveals a creature with a massive, heavy jaw, double-hinged like a snake, and a long, powerful tail. Possessed 4 paddle-like limbs. The paradox involves the speed and method of its predation. For a long time, mosasaurs were reconstructed as sea serpents, undulating their whole bodies like eels to swim. This method of locomotion is energy-intensive and relatively slow. Yet, the fossil content of their stomach regions often includes fast-moving prey sharks, diving birds like Hesperornis, and other large marine reptiles. How could a serpentine swimmer catch such agile prey in the open ocean? If they swam like eels, the drag would be immense. The mathematics of fluid dynamics suggests that an undulating 40-foot predator would be too slow to be the dominant hunter the fossil record suggests it was. The skeptics' view, the traditional interpretation, leaned on ambush tactics. The idea was that Tylosaurus lay in wait in the murky depths or seaweed forests, striking out with a burst of speed. They were seen as the crocodiles of the deep, relying on stealth rather than hydrodynamics. The rebuttal was buried in the soft tissue impressions that are rarely preserved. In a specific specimen, preserved in fine-grained sediment that captured the outline of the skin, we found the truth. Tylosaurus did not have a simple eel-like tail. It had a fluke, a distinct, semilunate tail fin, similar to that of a shark or an inverted ichthyosaur tail. Furthermore, the scales were not smooth. They were keeled, microscopic ridges that channeled water to reduce drag, a technology used today in the hulls of high-speed submarines. Tylosaurus was not a slithering sea serpent. It was a stiff-bodied, high-performance biological torpedo. It swam with the efficiency of a tuna, powering through the water with distinct thrashes of its tail fluke, holding its forelimbs tight against its body to streamline its silhouette. Imagine the Western Interior Seaway. The surface is a blinding mirror of turquoise under the Cretaceous sun. The water is warm, saltier than the modern ocean. Below the surface, the light filters down in shafts. The silence of the deep is broken by the click and whistle of ammonites and the low pulse of the currents. Suddenly, a shadow cuts through the gloom. It does not wind or slither. It rockets. The Tylosaurus is a blur of gray and white countershading. It impacts its prey, a shark, with the force of a freight train. The water pressure wave alone stuns the victim. This was a world of high-velocity violence, where the oceans were patrolled by leviathans that had perfected the art of hydrodynamics tens of millions of years before the first whale returned to the sea. We are now approaching the end. The geological column thins as we reach the layers corresponding to 66 million years ago. This is the KPG boundary. The final investigation is not of a beginning, but of a termination. The site is the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. The landscape of the late Cretaceous was a subtropical delta, rich, humid, and forested. The fact is the Tyrannosaurus rex. It is the most studied dinosaur in history. We have specimens that show evidence of healed injuries, distinct diseases, and growth patterns. We know it had the strongest bite force of any terrestrial animal ever. The paradox is the state of the ecosystem before the asteroid fell. There is a fierce debate, a statistical anomaly in the diversity of dinosaur species in these final layers. Some counts suggest that the number of dinosaur species was already crashing. The variety of herbivores seems to shrink. The skeptic argument here is the pulse theory, that the dinosaurs were already walking dead, weakened by massive volcanic eruptions from the Deccan Traps in India, which were poisoning the atmosphere and cooling the climate. The argument suggests that the asteroid was merely the final coup de grace for a dying lineage. They argue that even without the impact, the age of dinosaurs was over. The rebuttal comes from the resolution of the fossil record and the concept of preservation bias. When we look globally, not just at Hell Creek, we see that while some local populations fluctuated, the global dominance of the Dinosauria was absolute. They were not fragile. They were evolving. We see new forms of raptors, new ceratopsians, and the continued success of the titanosaurs. The decline is an illusion caused by the receding inland seas, limiting the areas where fossils could be preserved. The unifying theory of the Mesozoic is this: the system was robust. It was not a house of cards waiting to fall. It was a fortress. The dinosaurs had survived the breakup of continents, the shift from arid to humid climates, and the competition of emerging mammal groups. They were masters of adaptation. And then the sky fell. The climax of our story is recorded in a layer of iridium, a metal rare on Earth but common in asteroids, found globally in a thin strip of clay. The Chicxulub impactor, a rock 10 kilometers wide, struck the Yucatan Peninsula. We must slow down to witness this. This is not a scene for generic description. This is the single worst day in the history of life. The object enters the atmosphere at 45,000 miles per hour. It compresses the air in front of it so violently that the atmosphere turns into plasma. It strikes the shallow water of the Gulf of Mexico. The energy release is equivalent to 100 teratons of TNT. In the first second, the asteroid is vaporized. The bedrock beneath it is liquefied and thrown into the stratosphere. A hole 20 miles deep and 100 miles wide is punched into the crust. But it is the atmosphere that kills the world. The ejecta, trillions of tons of molten rock, is cast out into space only to fall back down. As these spherules re-enter the atmosphere, they burn. The sky turns into a broiler. The air temperature globally spikes to hundreds of degrees. Stand in the Hell Creek Formation, 3,000 miles away from the impact. You see the flash on the horizon, a second sun brighter than the first. Then the silence returns. But hours later, the sky begins to glow red. The stars are falling. The air begins to heat up. The forests ignite. The Tyrannosaurus, the apex of millions of years of evolution, looks up, its bird-like eyes reflecting the burning heavens. It does not understand that the era is ending, simply feels the heat. The so what of this deep dive is not just a catalog of dead monsters. It is a reflection on resilience and chance. The Mesozoic teaches us that dominance is not permanent. The dinosaurs did not fail. They were not flawed. They were simply unlucky. They lived on a planet that is part of a violent cosmic neighborhood. But the story does not end in death. It ends in transformation. In the smoking ruins of the KPG boundary, in the nuclear winter that followed, small, burrowing generalists survived. Some were furry, milk-producing synapsids, our ancestors. Others were feathered, beaked theropods, the birds. Every time you hear a crow cawing in the morning mist, you are listening to a dinosaur. Every time you see a sparrow hop on the pavement, you are watching the behavior of a survivor. The Mesozoic did not vanish. It evolved. The feathers that kept the small raptors warm in the impact winter now allow the eagle to soar. The hollow bones of the sauropod are the same engineering that allows the hummingbird to hover. We walk on the graves of giants, but we also walk alongside their ghosts. The earth remembers. The layers of silt and stone beneath our feet are not just a tomb. They are a library of what is possible. And as we look at our own layer, the Anthropocene, being written in plastic and concrete, we must ask, what will the future geologists say of our time? Will they see a paradox? A sudden explosion of technology followed by silence? Or will they see a transition, a moment where the planet's intelligence finally learned to read the rocks and navigate the future? The choice, unlike that of the Tyrannosaurus, is ours. The investigation continues. The deep time archives remain open. We just have to keep reading. However, the timeline we have just traversed is merely the skeleton. To understand the flesh and blood of the Mesozoic, we must venture into the corners of the map that defy the standard model of a warm, tropical Earth. The popular image of the dinosaur era is one of uniform steam, a planet of endless jungles and equatorial heat. But the rock record holds a colder, darker secret. To find it, we must journey to the bottom of the world, to a continent that today is a wasteland of ice, but was once a biological paradox. We descend into the Aptian stage of the early Cretaceous, roughly 110 million years ago. We are traveling to the polar circle, to the landmass that is now Antarctica. Today, the extraction of data from this region is a brutal logistical challenge, requiring icebreakers and heated drills to pierce the kilometers-thick glacial shield. But in the exposures of the Antarctic Peninsula and the rocky outcrops of the Transantarctic Mountains, we find the anomaly. The fact is the presence of complex, diverse dinosaur ecosystems located well within the Antarctic Circle. We find the fossilized trunks of large conifers, ferns, and cycads. We find the remains of Leolinosaura, a small ornithopod, and the formidable Cryolophosaurus, a crested theropod predator. These are not strays, they are residents. The paradox here is astronomical. We know from paleomagnetic data the magnetic alignment of minerals locked in the rock at the time of their formation, that this landmass was located at a latitude of 70 to 80 degrees south. While the global climate was warmer, the axial tilt of the Earth was the same as it is today. This means that for 3 to 4 months of the year, the sun did not rise. The ecosystem was plunged into a total, relentless polar night. How does a reptile, a class of animal defined by its dependence on external heat sources, survive 100 days of absolute darkness? Even if the temperatures did not drop to the extreme negatives of modern Antarctica, the lack of solar energy would cause temperatures to hover near or below freezing. The flora would cease photosynthesis. The energy input of the entire ecosystem would flatline. In the standard biological model, a reptile in this environment should freeze solid. Its metabolism should crash. It should be unable to forage, hunt, or defend itself. The skeptics' view often attempted to explain this away through migration. The argument was that these animals were summer tourists, trekking thousands of miles south to feed during the midnight sun and then retreating north as the shadows lengthened, much like the modern caribou. It was a comfortable explanation that preserved the idea of the cold-blooded dinosaur. But the rebuttal is found in the histology of the eyes and the bones. When we analyze the skull of Leolinosaura, we find that the optic lobes of the brain were enlarged. The orbits, the eye sockets, were disproportionately huge relative to the skull size. This is not the anatomy of a migratory animal that leaves when the light fades. This is the anatomy of a creature adapted to low light conditions. These animals were seeing in the dark. Furthermore, the bone structure shows no lines of arrested growth that typically correspond to long, dormant migrations or hibernation periods often seen in modern reptiles. The bones show continuous, rapid growth. This implies a high-burning, consistent metabolism. We must reconstruct the atmosphere of the Antarctic Cretaceous. Stand in the forest of the polar rift. It is noon, but the sky is a bruised purple, lit only by the spectral ribbons of the aurora australis dancing above the canopy. The air is cold, damp, biting, smelling of rotting pine needles and wet moss. There is no sun. The forest is not silent. It is rustling. Through the gloom, small, feathered shapes dart between the frozen ferns. They are not sluggish lizards dragging their bellies on the frost. They are warm. They are insulated by thick coats of protofeathers, trapping their metabolic heat against the chill. Breath steams from their nostrils. The Leolinosaura are active, foraging for fungi and roots in the pitch black, their massive eyes amplifying the starlight. This reveals a profound truth about the Mesozoic. Dinosaurs were not merely giant reptiles. They had cracked the code of endothermy. They had conquered the cold. They had colonized the darkness. The Antarctic paradox forces us to abandon the idea of dinosaurs as limited by temperature. They were an invasive, highly adaptable form of life that could endure conditions that would break a modern crocodile. We must now shift our gaze from the frozen south to the northern hemisphere, to a mystery buried not in ice, but in the red sandstone of the Sahara Desert. We are moving to the mid-Cretaceous of North Africa, a place known to geologists as the Kem-Kem beds. This region presents a statistical anomaly that has baffled paleontologists for decades. It is known as Stromer's riddle, named after the German paleontologist who first described the fossils there in the early 20th century. The fact is the predator-to-prey ratio. In almost every modern ecosystem, and in most fossil formations, the pyramid of life is wide at the bottom and narrow at the top. There are vast numbers of herbivores supporting a small number of carnivores. You might have 100 wildebeest for every one lion. But in the Kem-Kem beds, the ratio is inverted. We find an overwhelming abundance of apex predators. We find Carcharodontosaurus, a land shark with serrated teeth, Deltadromeus, a high-speed sprinter, and the monstrous Spinosaurus. The herbivores, the food source, are rare. The paradox is thermodynamic. An ecosystem cannot support more consumers than producers. It is a biological impossibility. If you have 5 different species of T-Rex-sized predators living in the same zip code, they should eat the ecosystem to extinction in a decade. How did the Kem-Kem beds support this museum of monsters? The skeptics' view initially suggested that this was a preservation bias, that perhaps the predators lived near the riverbanks where fossils form, while the herbivores lived further inland and were simply not preserved. Or perhaps the timescales were mixed, and these predators lived thousands of years apart. The rebuttal, however, comes from a deeper analysis of the geology and the isotope signatures in the teeth of the predators. The Kem-Kem was not a standard terrestrial environment. It was a vast, sprawling delta system, a network of mangrove swamps and wide, slow-moving rivers that dwarfed the Amazon. The solution to the paradox is that these predators were not eating each other, nor were they competing for the scarce land herbivores. They were partitioning a resource that we rarely consider in the Mesozoic, the water. This leads us to the central figure of this investigation, Spinosaurus aegyptiacus. For a century, this animal was misunderstood. It was reconstructed as a standard bipedal theropod, essentially a T-Rex with a sail on its back. But recent discoveries have unveiled a creature that defies all terrestrial logic. The fact is the skeleton of Spinosaurus. It is longer than a T-Rex, reaching 50 feet, but its proportions are wrong. The legs are impossibly short. The center of gravity is too far forward. The bones are solid and dense, lacking the marrow cavities found in other predatory dinosaurs. This is a condition called pachyostosis, found today in manatees and penguins. The paradox: a 50-foot bipedal predator with solid bones and short legs would be functionally crippled on land. It would be slow, unbalanced, and vulnerable. Yet it was an apex predator. The scientific counterquestion asked, is it possible for a dinosaur to be fully aquatic? The dogma held that dinosaurs were strictly terrestrial. Marine reptiles like mosasaurs were a separate lineage. Dinosaurs did not swim. The rebuttal is the tail. In 2020, a new excavation recovered the tail of Spinosaurus. It was not a stiff, balancing rod like that of a T-Rex. It was a flexible, massive paddle, tall and flat, combined with the dense bones which acted as ballast control to allow it to sink, and the conical, interlocking teeth perfect for gripping slippery prey. The conclusion is unavoidable. Spinosaurus was a river monster. It did not hunt on the banks. It hunted in the channel. Visualize the Kem-Kem river system. The water is murky, brown with sediment. The heat is oppressive. On the banks, a Carcharodontosaurus fights over a carcass. But in the water, the true giant moves. It swims with the silence of a crocodile, but on the scale of a whale. The massive sail pierces the surface, perhaps acting as a heat exchanger or a display structure. Below the waterline, the Spinosaurus pursues Onchopristis, a giant sawfish. This was a water-based economy. The reason the ecosystem could support so many giants is that the energy wasn't coming from the plants on the land. It was coming from the river. The Chem-Chem was an engine of protein, a unique moment in geological history where the line between land and water was erased by the monsters that lived in both. We must now look upwards. We have explored the dark forests and the deep rivers, but the Mesozoic atmosphere itself held a mystery that challenges the laws of aerodynamics. The investigation focuses on the pterosaurs of the late Cretaceous, specifically the Asdarchids, the family that includes Quetzalcoatlus northropi. The fact is the scale of this animal. Quetzalcoatlus stands as tall as a giraffe when on the ground. Its beak is sharp and longer than a human being. Its wingspan reaches 35 to 40 feet. It is the size of a small aircraft, a Cessna 172. The paradox is the physics of flight. In aviation and avian biology, there is a theoretical upper limit to powered flight. As an animal gets larger, its mass increases distinctively faster than its muscle power, the square cube law. To generate enough lift to get a 250-kilogram animal off the ground requires tremendous energy. Birds, which launch by leaping with their legs, reach a limit at around the size of the Argentavis, an extinct vulture, or the modern Cory bustard. Quetzalcoatlus was exponentially heavier. The skeptics' view for decades was that these giants were not true flyers. They were gliders. The theory proposed that they had to find a cliff, jump off, and ride thermal currents, unable to flap or take off from flat ground. They were viewed as fragile, paper-thin kites, drifting passively until they landed, at which point they were vulnerable and clumsy. The rebuttal comes from biomechanical modeling and the CT scans of their humerus, upper arm bone. The bone walls, while thin, were reinforced with internal struts, spirals of bone that provided immense torsional strength. But the key is the quad launch theory. Unlike birds, pterosaurs did not use just their hind legs to jump. They were quadrupeds. They walked on their folded wings. When it was time to launch, they used a pole vaulting mechanism. They would crouch, shifting their weight onto their massive front limbs, their wings, and explosively vault themselves into the air. This utilized the strongest muscles in their body for the takeoff. Mathematical models suggest that a Quetzalcoatlus could launch from a standstill on a flat plane, reaching 30 miles per hour in seconds before the first flap. Furthermore, they were not passive gliders. They were terrestrial stalkers. Their anatomy suggests they spent much of their time on the ground, striding through the tall grass like nightmares from a Bosch painting, snapping up small dinosaurs and lizards with their spear-like beaks. Imagine the shadow of this creature. It does not soar gracefully like a seagull. It dominates the airspace with a terrifying mechanical presence. On the ground, it is a folded giant, a giraffe made of leather and bone, stalking through the fern prairies of what is now Texas. When it takes flight, the sound is a thunderclap, the snap of vast membranes tautening against the wind. It is a reminder that the Mesozoic sky was not a place of birdsong and gentle fluttering. It was a domain of monsters who had turned the atmosphere into a hunting ground. Our investigation must now penetrate the very ground itself, to look at the soil that supported this entire superstructure of life. There is a missing piece in our understanding of the Mesozoic landscape that is often overlooked in favor of the animals: the revolution of the flowers. The fact is found in the botanical fossil record. For the majority of the Triassic and Jurassic, the world was green, but it was not colorful. The forests were dominated by gymnosperms, conifers, cycads, ginkgos, and ferns. These plants reproduce slowly, using wind to disperse pollen or requiring water for spores. They are distinctively slow-growing. Then, in the mid-Cretaceous, roughly 100 million years ago, a geological blink of an eye occurs. A new type of pollen appears in the sediment. It is the angiosperm, the flowering plant. The paradox is what Charles Darwin called an abominable mystery. The angiosperms appear suddenly and diversify with an aggression that resembles a military conquest. Within a few million years, they go from non-existent to dominating the understory. They replace the slow-growing ferns. They invent fruit. They invent complex flowers. The paradox lies in the speed. Evolution is typically gradual. How did plants suddenly learn to manipulate animals? The investigation reveals that this was not just a botanical change. It was a co-evolutionary explosion. The plants weaponized color and sugar. They entered into a contract with the insect world. Before this moment, insects were largely pests or incidental pollinators. The angiosperms changed the economy of the planet by offering a bribe: nectar. This triggered a feedback loop. The insects evolved to identify specific flowers, the birth of bees, butterflies, and specialized beetles. The flowers evolved to be more distinct to attract specific insects. This drove diversity at a rate never before seen in the history of life. But the so what of the flower revolution is energetic. Angiosperms grow fast. They pump carbon into the soil. They create calorie-dense fruit and seeds. This sudden injection of high-quality food into the base of the food web is what allowed the dinosaurs of the Cretaceous to become so diverse. The rise of the ceratopsians, like Triceratops, and the hadrosaurs, duckbills, tracks perfectly with the rise of flowering plants. These were the lawnmowers of the Mesozoic, evolving batteries of grinding teeth to process this new, fast-growing fuel. Close your eyes and visualize the color shift. For 150 million years, the Earth was shades of green and brown. Then suddenly, there is a splatter of red, yellow, purple, and white. The air fills with the drone of the first bees. The smell of the earth changes from the sharp, resinous scent of pine to the sweet, fermenting rot of fruit and the delicate perfume of blossoms. It was the moment the earth learned to seduce. This was the birth of the modern biosphere. As we near the end of our expanded investigation, we must address one final, lingering anomaly. It is a geological mystery that spans the entire era, the paradox of the high sea levels and the greenhouse Earth. We know the Mesozoic was hot. There were no polar ice caps. The CO2 levels were 4 to 5 times higher than today. The fact is the preservation of vast chalk deposits, the White Cliffs of Dover, the Niobrara chalk in Kansas. These are made of the microscopic skeletons of coccolithophores, algae that bloomed in the warm, shallow seas. The paradox is the stability. Climate models suggest that with such high CO2, the Earth should have entered a runaway greenhouse effect, where the oceans evaporated or the temperatures became lethal for complex life. Yet, for nearly 200 million years, the climate remained relatively stable, warm, and habitable. Why didn't the planet boil? The rebuttal lies in the deep ocean circulation. In our modern world, cold water sinks at the poles, driving the thermohaline circulation that oxygenates the deep ocean. In the Mesozoic, without cold poles, this engine should have stopped, leading to stagnant, dead oceans and anoxic events. And indeed, we find layers of black shale, evidence of times when the oceans did suffocate. But the planet corrected itself. The skeptic might argue the system was fragile, but the geological record shows a planetary thermostat in action. The weathering of the newly formed mountain ranges, like the Proto-Rockies and Andes, sucked CO2 out of the atmosphere. The massive algal blooms buried carbon in the seabed, which is now the oil we drill for. The Earth was constantly balancing on a knife edge of chemistry, regulating its own fever through biology and geology. This realization shifts our perspective of the Mesozoic from a time of monsters to a time of planetary optimization. It was a high-energy state. The engine of the Earth was running hot and fast. Life was larger, faster, and more demanding because the planet itself was providing more energy. We stand now at the true conclusion of our deep dive. We have looked at the bones, the rocks, the isotopes, and the pollen. We have seen the darkness of the Antarctic winter, felt the humidity of the global greenhouse, and heard the launch of the Quetzalcoatlus. The philosophical weight of this era is heavy. The Mesozoic lasted for 186 million years. Human civilization has existed for roughly 6,000. We are a blip, a rounding error. If the history of the Earth were a 24-hour clock, the reign of the dinosaurs would last nearly an hour. We have been here for seconds. The forgotten Earth is not a strange, alien world. It is the default setting of our planet. The icy, cool world we live in today is the anomaly. We are living in a rare interglacial pause. The hot, green, monster-filled world of the Mesozoic is what the Earth wants to be. Perhaps that is why we are so obsessed with it, why we dream of dragons and monsters. It is a genetic memory buried deep in the mammalian brainstem, a memory of the time when we were small and the world was very, very large. The investigation is never truly over. Every time a hammer strikes a rock in the Badlands of Montana, or a drill core is pulled from the Antarctic ice, the story changes. The Earth is a book that writes itself, erasing and rewriting its own pages. Our job is simply to read the fragments that remain before they, too, are ground to dust by the turning of the tectonic gears. To truly comprehend the Mesozoic, we must look beyond the monumental scale of the bones and mountains. The fossil record of stone is a record of death, a skeletal architecture stripped of its soft context. But there is another archive, rare and gem-like, that preserves the breath, the color, and the struggle of the Mesozoic in high definition. It is not found in the gray strata of limestone, but in the golden, translucent nodules of Cretaceous amber. Our investigation shifts to the Hukong Valley in Myanmar, a region geologically tortured by tectonic collision, yet holding within its soil the most pristine biological time capsules on the planet. This is the realm of the Burmese amber, dated to the Cenomanian stage 99 million years ago. The fact is the preservation of moments, not just materials. In stone, we find a dinosaur's femur. In amber, we find a dinosaur's tail, complete with skin, muscle, and feathers, arranged exactly as they were in the instant the animal was trapped. We find ticks swollen with blood that may belong to a dinosaur. We find flowers caught in the act of opening. The paradox of amber lies in the chemistry of decay. In a tropical rainforest, which the mid-Cretaceous was, the rate of decomposition is rapid. Humidity, bacteria, and fungi usually dismantle biological matter in days. Soft tissue should not survive. A feather should disintegrate. A spider web should vanish. Yet, in these golden tombs, we see the microscopic barbs of feathers and the iridescent sheen on a beetle's wing. How does a viscous tree sap halt the entropy of the jungle so effectively? The skeptic might view these inclusions as mere curiosities, pretty trinkets that offer little data compared to a complete skeleton. They argue that the sample size is too small, biased toward tiny things that get stuck in tree sap. The rebuttal is found in the chemical warfare of the ancient trees. The resin that formed this amber was not merely sticky sap. It was a complex antiseptic compound produced by Araucarian conifers to defend against insects and fungi. It acted as a natural embalming fluid. When a creature was engulfed, the resin sealed it off from oxygen and sterilized the bacteria that would normally cause rot. Zoom in on a specific specimen. a piece of amber no larger than an apricot. Inside, suspended in eternal golden twilight, is the tail of a coelurosaur. It is covered in feathers. But these are not the stiff, flight feathers of a modern bird. They are filamentous, chestnut brown on top, pale white on the underside. This countershading tells us about the animal's behavior. It was hiding, blending into the dappled light of the forest floor. We are not looking at a reconstruction. We are looking at the actual animal. This amber reveals the texture of the air. We find air bubbles trapped in the resin. Analysis of these bubbles confirms the atmospheric composition: high oxygen, fueling the intense fires that occasionally swept through these forests. We find evidence of the Cretaceous terrestrial revolution, the exact moment when flowering plants began to overtake the gymnosperms, trapped in the pollen grains stuck to a prehistoric wasp. Visualize the event. A young, sparrow-sized dinosaur skitters up the rough bark of a massive conifer, chasing a weevil. It slips. Its tail slaps against a fresh wound in the tree's bark, a weeping sore of golden resin. The fluid is thick like industrial glue. The dinosaur pulls, but the resin holds. It struggles, but the sap flows over the feathers, warm and suffocating. The animal eventually pulls free, or perhaps it dies there, but the tail remains. The resin hardens. It falls to the forest floor. It is buried by sediment. 99 million years pass. The continents slide. The Himalayas rise. And the tail waits, a perfect, chestnut-brown brushstroke of history, waiting to tell us that dinosaurs were not just gray monsters, but soft, tactile, and colorful creatures living in a world of dripping gold. The mammalian insurgency, the Ischian Pompeii. As we continue our excavation of the anomalies, we must address the underdogs of the Mesozoic. The popular narrative paints the era as a dictatorship of the dinosaurs, where mammals were nothing more than trembling, shrew-like snacks, hiding in the dark, waiting for the asteroid to clear the stage. This is a fabrication. Our investigation moves to the Ischian Formation in Liaoning Province, China. The rock here is different. It is composed of layers of volcanic ash and lacustrine, lake, sediment. This region, 125 million years ago, was a land of lakes and volcanoes, a temperate forest that was repeatedly buried by pyroclastic flows. It is the Pompeii of the Cretaceous. The fact is the discovery of Repenomamus robustus. This was not a shrew. It was a mammal the size of a badger or a large dog. It had heavy, short limbs and a skull built for crushing. The paradox challenges the concept of niche partitioning. The biological rule of thumb was that dinosaurs held the large body niches and mammals were forced into the micro niches. A mammal of this size in the early Cretaceous shouldn't exist. It defies the competitive exclusion principle. How could a mammal grow this large with velociraptor relatives hunting in the same forest? The skeptics' view before this discovery was absolute. Mammals were insignificant. They were ecologically suppressed. The rebuttal was found inside the ribcage of a Repenomamus fossil. There, fossilized in the stomach region, were the disjointed bones of a baby Psittacosaurus, a beaked dinosaur. The mammal had not just scavenged. The bones showed signs of being broken by fresh bites. The mammal had hunted the dinosaur. This single fossil inverts the power dynamic. It reveals that the war between mammals and dinosaurs was not one-sided. It was a complex, nocturnal guerrilla war. While the giants ruled the day, the mammals ruled the night. Further analysis of the Ischian mammals reveals advanced adaptations. We find Castrocauda, a beaver-like mammal with fur and a flat tail, proving mammals had invaded the water. We find Volaticotherium, a mammal with a gliding membrane like a flying squirrel, proving they had taken to the trees. The atmosphere of the Ischian forests was tense. Imagine a cool, volcanic morning. The mist rises from the lake. The ash from a distant eruption coats the leaves in a fine gray powder. A Psittacosaurus tends to its nest in the undergrowth. But from the burrow, Repenomamus emerges. It is heavy, muscular, and furred. It does not fear the small dinosaurs. It charges. This was a world where the lines between hunter and hunted were fluid. The mammals were not waiting for the end of the world. They were actively fighting for their place in it, developing the intelligence and versatility that would eventually allow them to inherit the Earth. The acoustic landscape, the physics of sound. We have reconstructed the look of the Mesozoic, but we must also reconstruct its sound. The atmosphere of the Cretaceous was different, denser, hotter, and filled with different acoustic properties. To understand this, we investigate the duck-billed dinosaurs, the hadrosaurs, specifically the lambeosaurines like Parasaurolophus. The fact is the crest, a hollow, tubular structure extending backward from the skull, reaching lengths of up to 6 feet. Internally, this crest is a labyrinth of air chambers, looping back and forth before connecting to the nostrils. The paradox involves the evolutionary cost. Growing such a massive bone structure is expensive energetically. It makes the animal front heavy. It is brittle. If it were merely for visual display to attract a mate, a structure made of keratin or skin like a rooster's comb would be cheaper and lighter. Why build a trombone out of bone? The skeptics' view originally suggested it was a snorkel, disproven, as there is no hole at the top, or a weapon. Later, it was dismissed as pure sexual selection, a visual flag. The rebuttal comes from the field of acoustic physics. When we model the air passages of the Parasaurolophus crest and simulate airflow through it, the structure functions exactly like a resonance chamber. It is a biological infrasound generator. The dimensions of the tubes correspond to specific low-frequency notes. These sounds are below the range of human hearing, similar to the rumble of elephants or whales. In the dense, chaotic vegetation of the Cretaceous bayous, high-frequency sounds, like chirps or shrieks, dissipate quickly, absorbed by leaves. But low-frequency infrasound travels for miles, penetrates the forest. It travels through the ground. This reveals the Mesozoic as a noisy planet, but often in a register we could not hear. Stand in the swamps of the Kuiperowitz Formation. The air is thick with humidity and the drone of giant dragonflies. You see a herd of Parasaurolophus grazing in the distance. They seem silent, but if you place your hand on the trunk of a cycad, you feel it vibrating. The air in your chest cavity resonates. They are singing, a deep, mournful, booming chorus that connects the herd across the landscape. The crest is not just a hat, it is a radio antenna. The silence of the prehistoric world is an illusion of our limited human hearing. The air was alive with the invisible architecture of sound. The oceanic anoxia. When the sea stopped breathing, we return to the oceans but not to the predators. We descend into the chemistry of the water itself. There are distinct bands in the geological record, global horizons of black shale, known as oceanic anoxic events, OAEs. The most severe of these in the Cretaceous is OAE2, at the Cenomanian-Turonian boundary, roughly 94 million years ago. The fact is the black shale. It is rock rich in organic carbon, formed from dead plankton that sank to the bottom and never decayed because there was no oxygen to fuel the bacteria. For 500,000 years, the deep oceans became a dead zone. The paradox is the coincidence of life and death. This event happened during the peak of the Cretaceous greenhouse. The world was lush. Life was booming. Why did the oceans suddenly suffocate? The skeptic argues it was a slow stagnation, a gradual slowing of currents. The rebuttal points to the Caribbean Large Igneous Province, a massive underwater volcanic eruption. This pumped nutrients into the ocean, triggering a runaway algae bloom. The algae grew so fast they consumed all the available oxygen. When they died, their decomposition used up the rest. The ocean became stratified. The surface was a warm, toxic soup of green slime. The bottom was a dark, sulfurous wasteland. This is the dark side of the high-energy Mesozoic. The planet was volatile. Visualize the Cretaceous Ocean during OAE2. From the shore, it looks beautiful, turquoise and warm. But if you dive, you hit a barrier. Below 50 meters, the water turns purple, stained by sulfur-loving bacteria. There are no fish here, no ammonites, only the slow rain of organic snow falling into the black abyss. It is a reminder that the biosphere is fragile. The Earth can and has turned against life. The monsters of the deep, the mosasaurs, were forced into the shallow surface waters, compressed into a killing jar near the coast, while the deep ocean became a planetary graveyard. The island of dwarfs, the Hayteg archipelago. Finally, we travel to the very end of the Cretaceous, to a lost geography in what is now Romania. This is the Hayteg Island ecosystem. The fact is the size of the dinosaurs here. We find Magurosaurus, a sauropod relative of the giant Argentinosaurus. But Magurosaurus is the size of a pony. We find Telmatosaurus, a hadrosaur the size of a cow. The paradox is the lineage. These are titanosaurs and hadrosaurs, families defined by gigantism. How did they shrink? The skeptic suggests they were juveniles. The rebuttal is in the bone histology. The bones of Magurosaurus show dense remodeling and close growth rings. They were old adults. They were fully grown dwarfs. This is the phenomenon of insular dwarfism. Hayteg was an island, isolated by rising sea levels. Resources were limited. There was no room for a 50-ton animal. Evolution selected for the small. This changes our perception of dinosaurs as inherently monstrous. They were plastic. They could scale down. Imagine the Hayteg Island. It is a tropical paradise, isolated from the mainland. The trees are smaller. The rivers are narrow. Walking through the ferns is a herd of long-necked sauropods, but you are looking them in the eye. They are miniature titans, perfect replicas of their giant cousins, grazing on knee-high bushes. It is a biological dollhouse. It proves that the dinosaurian body plan was not locked into gigantism. It was a master of efficiency, expanding to fill a continent or shrinking to survive on a rock in the ocean. The sky above, the hypercane hypothesis. As we synthesize these investigations, we must look at the engine driving it all. The atmosphere. We have mentioned the heat, but we have not fully explored the violence of the weather. The fact is the energy budget. With ocean surface temperatures reaching 35 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and no polar front to cool the air, the thermodynamics of storms changes. The paradox is the limit of modern storms. Today, hurricanes have a theoretical intensity limit because the ocean isn't hot enough. The scientific counter-question: what happens when the ocean is hot enough? The rebuttal comes from theoretical meteorology. The hypercane. Models suggest that in the Mesozoic, storms could form that dwarf anything in human history. Systems the size of continents. Winds exceeding 500 miles per hour. Barometric pressures so low they would cause decompression sickness in animals. These were not just storms. They were atmospheric scrubbers. They would strip forests to the bedrock. They would inject water vapor into the stratosphere, altering the ozone layer. Visualize the approach of a Cretaceous superstorm. The sky turns a bruised, sickly green. The drop in pressure makes your ears pop painfully. The sound approaches not as wind, but as a solid wall of noise. The waves on the coast are 50 feet high before the storm even arrives. When it hits, it is not weather. It is geological erosion happening in real time. The dinosaurs did not just live in a greenhouse, they lived in a pressure cooker. Their survival for 180 million years is a testament to an endurance we can barely fathom. But the storm is only the macroscopic violence. While the atmosphere waged war on the forests, a quieter, more insidious siege was taking place on the skin of the giants. To fully understand the daily reality of the Mesozoic, we must zoom in past the trees, past the scales, to the microscopic landscape of the hide. We must investigate the empire of the parasite. The investigation brings us to the Dahugu beds of Inner Mongolia, a Jurassic formation that preserves the delicate, chitinous exoskeletons of insects. The fact is the existence of Pseudopulex jurassicus. This is a flea, but it is not the speck of dust that plagues modern mammals. It is a monster in its own right, measuring nearly an inch in length. It possesses a beak-like mouthpart that is serrated and incredibly long, looking more like a hypodermic drill than a mouth. The paradox is the biological investment. Why would a parasite evolve to be this massive? In the world of parasitism, stealth is usually key. Being large makes you detectable. Being large makes you vulnerable to being groomed or scratched off. A flea the size of a hornet seems like an evolutionary suicide mission. The skeptics' view suggested these might be aquatic insects or striders, misidentified as parasites. The rebuttal lies in the mechanics of the dinosaurian skin. We know from skin impressions of animals like Diplodocus and Tyrannosaurus that their hide was not just leathery. It was armored. It was a pavement of non-overlapping scales, reinforced with osteoderms, bony plates embedded in the skin. A modern flea's mouthparts would shatter against this biological Kevlar. The Pseudopulex evolved its terrifying size and drill-like proboscis for one specific purpose: to penetrate the armor of a dinosaur. It required massive muscular strength in its neck and jaws to drive that spike through the tough, pebbled hide of a sauropod or a theropod. This changes the sensory experience of the dinosaur. We often imagine them standing stoic in the landscape, but visualize the reality. A stegosaurus is grazing, suddenly shudders. It rubs its massive flank against a rough conifer trunk, tearing the bark. It is itching. It is plagued by a colony of inch-long bloodsuckers that are drilling into the soft tissue between its scales. The life of a dinosaur was not just a battle against predators. It was a constant, irritating battle against the infestation. The thick skin was not enough. This adds a layer of misery and agitation to the era, a visceral texture of discomfort that the clean bones in a museum do not convey. We must now shift our focus from the skin to the beginning of life itself. We have discussed the survivors, but we have not discussed the mechanism of birth. The Mesozoic was an era of the egg. The investigation takes us to the Huiyuan Basin in China, known as the hometown of the dinosaur egg. Tens of thousands of eggs have been recovered here. The fact is the pigment biliverdin. For decades, dinosaur eggs were assumed to be white like chicken eggs. We pictured nests of pale porcelain spheres. But chemical analysis of the shell matrix in Oviraptorosaur eggs has revealed traces of biliverdin and protoporphyrin. The paradox is the visibility. White eggs are dangerous. They act as beacons to predators, reflecting light against the dark soil. In a world teeming with egg-eaters, snakes, mammals, other dinosaurs, laying white eggs in an open nest is a death sentence. The rebuttal confirms that these eggs were not white. They were blue-green. They were speckled. They were camouflaged. This discovery forces us to rethink the nesting behavior. Colorful eggs are typically found in modern birds that have open nests, where the eggs need to blend in with the leaves and shadows. This implies that many dinosaurs were not burying their eggs in mounds of rotting vegetation like crocodiles, but were sitting on them, open brooding, Visualize the nesting ground of a gigantoraptor. It is an animal that stands 16 feet tall. It sits gingerly in a dust bowl, arranging its massive feathered plumes to cover a clutch of football-sized turquoise eggs. The shells are textured, covered in ridges to increase strength. The parent is not cold and distant. It is attentive, rotating the eggs, keeping them at a precise temperature. The Mesozoic forest floor was not just brown and green. It was dotted with clutches of blue, speckled with black, hidden art galleries of calcium carbonate waiting to hatch. But there is a deeper mystery regarding reproduction, one that touches on the physics of size. The sauropod size limit. The fact is that the largest dinosaur eggs are roughly the size of a soccer ball. This is the biological limit. The paradox is the discrepancy. A titanosaur weighs 70 tons. A newborn titanosaur weighs less than 10 pounds. The size difference is astronomical. In mammals, a blue whale calf is born weighing nearly 3 tons. Why is the dinosaur trapped in such a small starting package? The skeptic argues it's just a reptilian trait. The rebuttal is gas exchange. An eggshell must be porous enough to let oxygen in, but thick enough not to collapse under the weight of the fluid inside. If you make an egg bigger than a soccer ball, the shell must be so thick to support the structure that oxygen cannot pass through. The embryo would suffocate. This physical constraint dictated the entire social structure of the giants. Because they started so small, the growth rate had to be explosive. A titanosaur had to gain nearly 100 pounds a day during its teenage years. This required a metabolism that burned hot and fast. It meant that the herds were constantly moving because the juveniles were stripping the land bare to fuel this impossible growth. The smallness of the egg drove the migration of the giant. As we widen our lens again, we must look up, not at the atmosphere, but through it, to the cosmos. The Earth of the Mesozoic was not just a different planet. It was in a different place in the galaxy. The fact is the galactic year. The Sun orbits the center of the Milky Way once every 250 million years. When the dinosaurs first appeared in the Triassic, our solar system was on the other side of the galaxy, in a completely different spiral arm. The paradox is the starlight. If you stood in the Triassic night, the constellations would be unrecognizable. The North Star did not exist. The bands of the Milky Way would be viewed from a different angle. But closer to home, the mechanics of the Earth's rotation were different. The fact is the length of the day. The moon is slowly drifting away from the Earth, and as it does, the Earth's rotation slows down. This is conservation of angular momentum. In the late Triassic, the day was not 24 hours long. It was roughly 22 hours and 40 minutes. So what of this is biorhythmic? The circadian clocks of these animals were set to a faster tempo. Over the course of the Mesozoic, the year had more days, roughly 375 days in a year. Visualize the sunset in the Jurassic. The sun dips below the horizon faster than it does today. The twilight is shorter. The night rushes in. The spinning of the planet is palpable. The great sauropods had less time to feed, less time to sleep. The pulse of the planet was quicker. We are living in the sluggish old age of the Earth's rotation. The dinosaurs lived in its energetic prime. We must now turn to a geological phenomenon that shaped the destiny of the continents themselves. A slow-motion catastrophe that created the world we know today. The breakup. The investigation focuses on the separation of South America from Africa during the Cretaceous. This was the birth of the Atlantic Ocean. The fact is the sheer violence of the rift. We often think of continental drift as imperceptibly slow, and it is, but the moments of fracture are violent. The paradox is the biological connection. We find sister species of dinosaurs on the coasts of Brazil and the coasts of Cameroon. Spinosaurids, Carcharodontosaurids. They are almost identical. The The skeptic assumes they migrated across land bridges. The rebuttal is that there were no bridges. The rift valley that formed between the continents was initially a dry, blistering salt flat below sea level, similar to the modern Afar Triangle or the Dead Sea. Then the ocean breached the wall. Visualize the day the Atlantic was born. For millions of years, a deep scar had been widening between the continents, a valley of salt and magma. Then the natural dam to the north collapsed. The water from the embryonic ocean poured in. It was a waterfall thousands of miles wide. The roar would have been audible across the entire hemisphere. The salt flats were flooded. The populations of dinosaurs were permanently cut in half. A family of Spinosaurus on the west bank became South Americans. A family on the east bank became Africans. From that day on, their evolutionary paths diverged. The Atlantic Ocean is not just a body of water. It is a scar where the family tree of the Dinosauria was torn asunder. As the continents drifted, they created new, isolated laboratories of evolution. We must investigate the lost continent of Laramidia. During the late Cretaceous, North America was cut in half by the Western Interior Seaway. The western half, a strip of land stretching from Alaska to Mexico, was Laramidia. The fact is the diversity density. This strip of land is roughly 1/5 the size of modern North America. Yet it hosts the highest diversity of dinosaur species ever discovered. The paradox is the species area effect. In ecology, smaller land masses usually support fewer species, especially large ones. Laramidia was cramped, yet we find dozens of species of ceratopsians, horned dinosaurs, and hadrosaurs living virtually on top of each other. The skeptic argues that these species didn't live at the same time, that we are looking at a time-averaged illusion. The rebuttal, using high-precision radiometric dating, shows that they did overlap. The solution to the paradox is extreme provincialism. The dinosaurs of Laramidia were highly segregated. A species of Chasmosaurus living in what is now Utah might never meet a species of Pentaceratops living in New Mexico, even though there were no physical barriers between them. Why? The theory is sexual selection run amok. The horns and frills of the ceratopsians were not just for defense. They were flags. They were badges of identity. In such a crowded environment, looking distinct was the most important survival trait. If you look like the neighbors, you might mate with the wrong species, producing infertile offspring. The evolutionary pressure to be different drove an explosion of bizarre headgear. Visualize the coastal plains of Laramidia. It is a riot of biological fashion. You see herds of Styracosaurus with their spike-studded frills. A few hundred miles south, the frills change shape, becoming square or heart-shaped. It was a landscape of clans, defined by the architecture of their skulls. This was evolution acting not on survival of the fittest, but survival of the most distinct. We have explored the land, the sea, the air, and the cosmos, but we have not touched upon the element that is most ephemeral, the fire. The investigation leads us to the Cretaceous coal seams. The Mesozoic was a high-oxygen world. At its peak, oxygen levels reached perhaps 30%, compared to 21% today. The fact is charcoal. The fossil record is full of it. Inertinite, fossilized charcoal, is ubiquitous in Cretaceous layers. The paradox is the dampness. We know the world was humid. Rainforests covered the planet. Rainforests typically do not burn easily. They are wet. The rebuttal is the oxygen. At 30% oxygen, the physics of combustion changes. Wet wood burns. Green leaves burn. Even moss can ignite. The so what is the concept of the firestorm. The Mesozoic forests were not the stable, eternal cathedrals of green we imagine. They were volatile. A single lightning strike could trigger a firestorm that would rage for months. This created a specific evolutionary pressure. speed. The dinosaurs had to be able to outrun the flames. But more importantly, the plants had to recover. This may have been another driver for the angiosperms, the flowering plants. They are weedy. They grow back fast after a disturbance. The gymnosperms, the pines and cycads, take years. The fire selected for the flowers. Visualize the night in a high-oxygen forest. A storm passes. Lightning strikes a wet cycad. It doesn't smolder. It explodes. The fire leaps with terrifying speed, burning hotter and brighter than any modern fire. The flames are white-hot. The herd of Triceratops stampedes, not from a predator, but from the crackling wall of heat. The fire clears the land, resetting the stage, turning the old growth into ash that will feed the next explosion of flowers. The Mesozoic was a world that burned as intensely as it lived. As we continue to layer these details, the picture of the forgotten Earth becomes heavier, more complex. It was a world of high-gravity consequences, a world where fleas were drills, where rain was a deluge, where the day was short, and where the forest was a powder keg. But amidst this high-energy chaos, there were moments of profound stillness and strange beauty that we are only just beginning to understand. We must look at the phenomenon of bioluminescence. The investigation takes us to the deep marine deposits. We know that in the modern ocean, 90% of deep-sea animals produce light. The fact is the phylogenetic bracket. Many of the lineages that glow today, ostracods, jellyfish, certain fish, existed in the Mesozoic. The paradox is the lack of direct evidence. Light does not fossilize. The rebuttal is the eye size. We look at the ophthalmic cavities of the marine reptiles, the ichthyosaurs like Ophthalmosaurus. They had the largest eyes in the history of the animal kingdom, distinctively larger than a soccer ball. Why do you need an eye that big in the pitch black of the deep ocean? To capture the smallest photons. Visualize the midnight zone of the Jurassic Ocean. It is not dark. It is a galaxy of biological stars. The water is filled with drifting, pulsing lights, blue, green, red. Down through this constellation dives the Ophthalmosaurus. Its massive eyes are sensitive to the specific wavelength of the bioluminescence. It is hunting by the light of its prey. The ocean was a light show, and perhaps this light was not limited to the ocean. There is a controversial hypothesis regarding the feathers of certain dinosaurs. Modern birds see in the ultraviolet spectrum. Some feathers that look drab to us glow with UV patterns, stand in the twilight of the Cretaceous forest. To human eyes, the microraptor perched on the branch looks black, like a crow. But if we could switch our eyes to the ultraviolet spectrum, the spectrum of the dinosaur, the animal ignites. Its feathers flash with iridescent patterns, hidden signals of health and status visible only to its own kind. The Mesozoic was not just colorful. It was hyper-colorful, painted in wavelengths we cannot even perceive. As we navigate the final corridors of the Mesozoic labyrinth, we must dismantle one last lingering prejudice. The idea that the dinosaur was a creature of cold instinct, devoid of affection. For generations, science presumed that reptiles simply laid their eggs and walked away, leaving their offspring to the mercy of the elements. This was the our selection model: produce many cheap offspring and hope a few survive. But the sediment of Montana tells a different, softer story. Our investigation brings us to Egg Mountain, a site within the Two Medicine Formation. The subject is Maiasaura peeblesaurum. The name itself is the clue. The good mother lizard. The fact is the nest structure. We find not just isolated clutches, but colonies. These nests are spaced exactly one mother's length apart. This is a deliberate, calculated geometry to allow the adults to navigate the rookery without stepping on the neighbor's eggs. The paradox is the condition of the hatchlings. We find the fossilized bones of babies in the nests, but they are not newborns. They are 3, 4, even 5 times the size of a hatchling. Their leg joints are not fully ossified, they were too weak to run. Their teeth show wear. The skeptics' view was that these were simply communal dumping grounds for dead juveniles. The rebuttal is the wear patterns on the teeth. A baby that cannot run cannot hunt. A baby that cannot hunt but has worn teeth is eating food that is being brought to it. This changes the acoustic landscape of the Cretaceous once again. Visualize the rookery. It is deafening. Thousands of nesting Maiasaura, each 30 feet long, tending to the mounds. The air is filled with the high-pitched, demanding mewling of the young. The adults are constantly moving, foraging in the nearby ferns, bringing back regurgitated plant matter to feed the nestlings. This is altruism. This is the birth of the family unit. The Mesozoic was not just a battlefield. It was a nursery. The investment in the next generation was immense. This suggests a transfer of knowledge. Did the mother teach the young the migration routes? Did they learn the sounds of the predators? The dinosaur was not just a biological machine. It was a social entity, bound by the same hormones of bonding, oxytocin, and prolactin that bind mammals today. The tragedy of the extinction is not just the loss of genetic diversity, but the loss of cultural memory passed down through these herds for millions of years. The fragility of perfection, the specialization trap. We have established that the Mesozoic Earth was a high-energy engine, a planetary pressure cooker that drove life to extremes of size, speed, and efficiency. But within this perfection lay a fatal flaw. The ecosystem was a house of cards, built taller and more complex than any before it, but structurally rigid. The investigation focuses on the concept of hyperspecialization. The fact is the specific adaptation. Look at the Tyrannosaurus rex. It evolved to kill Triceratops and Edmontosaurus. Its teeth, its jaw muscles, its binocular vision, every molecule of its being was tuned to hunting large, armored prey. Look at the flowering plants. They evolved to be pollinated by specific insects. The paradox is the lack of redundancy. In a generalist ecosystem, if one food source fails, the animal switches to another. A rat can eat grain, meat, trash, or insects. A T-Rex cannot eat beetles. A titanosaur cannot survive on detritus. So what is the vulnerability of the complex? The Mesozoic biosphere was like a finely tuned Formula One car. Incredibly fast, incredibly powerful, but if you change the fuel mixture by 1%, the engine seizes. The system relied on the stability of the greenhouse Earth. It relied on the sun. It relied on the seasons remaining predictable. The dinosaurs had traded adaptability for dominance. They had become too good at being what they were. They were the masters of their specific reality. But reality was about to change. The final winter, the silence of the Paleogene. We have witnessed the impact of the Chicxulub asteroid in the previous chapters, the fire, the shockwave, the immediate violence. But the true extinction did not happen in the first 24 hours. The true extinction happened in the dark. We must chronicle the long winter. This is the period immediately following the thermal pulse, lasting for months, perhaps years. The atmosphere is choked with sulfate aerosols and soot. The sun is a dim, brown smear in the sky, providing less light than a full moon. The global temperature plunges. The tropical greenhouse of the Cretaceous collapses into a freezing, gray wasteland. The fact is the fern spike. In the geological layer immediately above the KPG boundary, the disaster layer, we find a sudden, massive abundance of fern spores. Roughly 99% of the pollen found is from ferns. The paradox is the absence of everything else. Where are the trees? Where are the flowers? The rebuttal is that ferns are the disaster taxa. They are the first to colonize a destroyed landscape. They do not need pollinators. They can grow in low light. The fern spike is the signature of a dead world trying to restart. Visualize the silence. It is absolute. The roaring herds are gone. The forests of gymnosperms are now forests of charcoal skeletons, black spikes sticking out of the gray snow. There is no bird song, for most of the archaic birds died. There is no insect drone. In this frozen landscape, the survivors are moving. They are small. The Purgatorius, a primitive primate ancestor, scuttles through the ash. It is eating fungi that grow on the decaying bodies of the giants. It is eating seeds that were buried deep in the soil, protected from the fire. The key to survival was the beak. The bird lineage that survived, the Neornithes, were the ground-dwelling seed-eaters. The carnivorous birds, the toothed birds, the tree-dwelling birds, they starved. But the ones who could crack open a hard shell and eat the dormant energy of a seed survived the darkness. We are here today because our ancestors were scavengers. We are here because a small bird found a seed in the ash. The recovery, the terror of the Cenozoic. The Earth does not stay dead. The resilience of the biosphere is the ultimate lesson of deep time. 10 million years after the impact, the wound has healed. The crater in the Yucatan is buried under sediment. The atmosphere has cleared. The sun is back. But the cast of characters has changed. The investigation moves to the Eocene, the dawn of the new. The fact is the vacuum. The dinosaurs left a massive ecological void. The large herbivore and large predator niches were empty. Nature abhors a vacuum. The paradox is who filled it. We assume mammals immediately took over. But for a brief, terrifying window, the dinosaurs came back. The subject is the forest rhapsody, the terror birds. In South America, isolated from the rest of the world, the theropod lineage reclaimed the throne. These birds stood 10 feet tall. They could run at 40 miles per hour. They had beaks the size of pickaxes. They were essentially tyrannosaurs with feathers. The skeptic might view the age of mammals as inevitable. The rebuttal is that it was a war. The mammals were not destined to rule. They had to fight for it. For millions of years, the planet was a battleground between the warm-blooded, furry upstarts and the last, terrifying iterations of the dinosaurian blueprint. Visualize the Eocene plains. A herd of primitive horses, Hypercanes, the size of foxes, are grazing. Suddenly, the grass parts. A Titanes strikes. It is a scene straight out of the Cretaceous, replayed in the Age of Milk. The dinosaurs did not go quietly. They haunted the Cenozoic for millions of years, forcing the mammals to get smarter, faster, and more social. The shadow of the dinosaur shaped our own evolution. We became runners to escape the terror birds. We became cooperators to defend against them. The climax, the unifying theory of the Great Filter. We have now traversed the entire arc, from the Permian ashes to the rise of the mammals. We must pull these threads together into a single, cohesive theory of the Mesozoic. The unifying theory is that the Mesozoic Era was the Earth's high-energy experimental phase. For 180 million years, the planet tested the limits of biology. It asked, how big can a terrestrial animal get? Answer, Argentinosaurus. How fast can a metabolism run? Answer, Deinonychus. How complex can a social structure be without spoken language? Answer, Maiasaura. The Earth provided the resources, the CO2, the heat, the tectonic fragmentation, to allow these experiments to run to completion. The result was a biosphere of unimaginable complexity and grandeur. But the second part of the theory is the geological reset. The Earth is a self-cleaning system. When the specialization becomes too rigid, when the energy consumption becomes too high, the system is prone to correction. The asteroid was a chance event, yes, But the mass extinctions, the Triassic-Jurassic, the KPG, are the punctuations in the sentence of life. They are the moments where the board is flipped and the rules are rewritten. The Mesozoic teaches us that dominance is not a shield. The dinosaurs were the most successful vertebrates in history. They occupied every niche. They were perfect, and they died. The theory suggests that intelligence, the kind that builds cities and records podcasts, is a late-stage evolutionary gamble. It only appears when the brute force approach of get big and eat everything finally fails. We are the backup plan. We are the software update that runs on the hardware left behind by the giants. The so what, the mirror of the Anthropocene. Why does this matter? Why should a commuter on a train or a person drifting off to sleep care about the respiratory system of a sauropod or the orbital mechanics of the Cretaceous? Because we are doing it again. We are currently engineering a climate that mimics the Mesozoic. We are pumping carbon into the atmosphere at a rate 10 times faster than the volcanic eruptions of the Deccan Traps. We are warming the oceans. We are creating dead zones. We are driving a mass extinction event that rivals the asteroid impact in its speed. But there is a difference. The dinosaurs were passengers on the Earth. They were subject to the whims of the volcanoes and the stars. We are the drivers. The so what is the realization that the greenhouse Earth, the hot, flooded, storm-racked planet of the dinosaurs, is not just a past reality. It is a potential future reality. If we continue on our current path, we are not moving away from the Mesozoic. We are moving toward it. We are terraforming the Earth back into a planet for monsters. The problem is, we are not monsters. We are the children of the cool, stable Holocene. We are the children of the Ice Ages. We cannot survive in the world of the Spinosaurus. We cannot live in the hypercanes. We cannot farm in the fern spikes. The study of the forgotten Earth is not escapism. It is a warning. It is a simulation that has already been run. We have the data. We know what happens when the CO2 hits 1000 ppm. We know what happens when the oceans stop breathing. The rocks have told us the ending of that story, the philosophical outro, the legacy of the stone. As the narration draws to a close, we must leave the listener not in a state of fear, but in a state of awe and deep perspective. Go back to the beginning. Hold a stone in your hand. It is cold, heavy, silent. But inside that matrix of silica and calcium, there is a vibration. If you could compress the 4.5 billion years of Earth's history into a single year, the Mesozoic would start in mid-December and end on December 26th. The dinosaurs would own the holiday season. The pyramids of Egypt would be built in the last minute of the last day. The Industrial Revolution would happen in the last millisecond of the last second. The dinosaurs are not ancient history. In the context of the planet, they just left the room. Their warmth is still in the chair. We walk on a planet that is paved with their bones. The limestone in the concrete of our skyscrapers is made of the shells of their sea creatures. The gas in our cars is the distilled sunlight of their plankton. The birds that sing on the power lines are their direct, living descendants, singing the songs of the Cretaceous in the morning light of the Anthropocene. The Earth is not ours. We are simply the current tenants. And like the tenants before us, we will be judged not by what we built, but by what we left behind. The Mesozoic was a time of thunder, a time of giants, a time when the life force of the planet burned with a white-hot intensity that has never been matched. It was a time when the Earth was dreaming of dragons, and in the quiet of the museum or the solitude of a canyon, if you listen closely to the wind eroding the sandstone, you can still hear the echo of that dream. You can hear the footfalls of the titanosaurs shaking the ground. You can hear the cry of the pterosaurs claiming the sky. The monsters are gone, but the world they built is still here, beneath our feet. waiting for us to remember. The investigation is complete. The file is closed, but the deep time continues to tick. Sleep well, traveler, and dream of the giants